My name is Hannah Mitchell, 34, and I was in the middle of presenting a fraud case to my department when my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. 6 credit alerts in 5 minutes. When I finally checked, I froze. A $100,000 loan had been approved in my name yesterday. As I investigated further, my stomach dropped. The secondary contact number? My sister, Kimberly's. The address? Her apartment. The signature? A perfect forgery of mine. My sister stole my identity for a 6-figure loan. What she didn't realize was that I investigate financial crimes for the Federal Banking Commission, and I was about to bring the full weight of my experience down on her. Before I dive into this incredible family betrayal, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. This story took me on a journey through every emotion imaginable, from shock to heartbreak to resolve. And I hope sharing it helps someone out there facing similar family challenges. If you appreciate real stories about navigating complex family dynamics and seeing justice served, please hit that like button and subscribe to stay connected. Now, let's get back to the moment my world turned upside down. Growing up in a modest suburban neighborhood in Pittsburgh, Kimberly and I were once inseparable despite our 3-year age difference. Our childhood photos show us with matching outfits and identical grins. She was my shadow, following me everywhere, and I was her protector. We shared not just a room, but secrets, dreams, and that special language siblings sometimes develop. Our parents, Richard and Linda, raised us with strong middle-class values. Work hard, save your money, help others. At least, that was the intention. Everything changed when I was 15 and Kimberly was 12. Our parents' marriage fell apart after years of fighting about money. Dad was cautious and conservative with finances, while Mom always wanted more house, more clothes, more status among her friends. Their divorce was bitter and divisive in the way that fundamentally reshapes a family's DNA. I chose to live with Dad, a decision that created the first real rift between my sister and me. Kimberly stayed with Mom, who seemed determined to maintain appearances despite her reduced circumstances. While Dad taught me to budget, save, and make responsible financial decisions, Mom appeared to be teaching Kimberly something very different. That material things brought happiness, and that financial rules were flexible. In high school, I worked part-time at a local bookstore, saving almost every penny for college. Meanwhile, Kimberly was developing expensive tastes, designer clothes, costly outings with friends, the newest phone, all somehow provided by our mother despite her constant complaints about being broke. When I would visit them, Mom would whisper requests for loans that were never repaid. I put myself through undergraduate studies at Penn State with scholarships, part-time jobs, and careful planning. Even then, I noticed Kimberly's troubling patterns emerging. She would borrow things without asking, my clothes, my textbooks, even my car once. Items would go missing from my dorm room after her visits. When confronted, she always had an excuse or claimed it was a misunderstanding. The first major incident happened during my junior year when our grandmother called me, confused about her savings account showing unexpected withdrawals. After some investigation, we discovered Kimberly had somehow convinced the bank she was authorized on the account and had withdrawn nearly $5,000 over 3 months. Grandma didn't press charges, and Mom defended Kimberly, claiming it was just a loan that Kimberly intended to repay. After college, I pursued law school with a focus on financial crimes. My decision wasn't entirely coincidental. Growing up watching my mother's financial chaos and Kimberly's evolving behaviors had sparked my interest in how and why people commit financial fraud. I graduated with honors and landed a position at the Federal Banking Commission, where I specialized in identity theft and loan fraud cases. The irony of this career choice would only become apparent years later. Kimberly dropped out of community college after 1 semester. She bounced between retail jobs, never staying anywhere more than a few months. During this time, she asked me for a $3,000 loan for a business opportunity that she promised would turn her life around. Against my better judgment, I transferred the money. I never saw a penny back, and the business never materialized. When I asked about repayment, she would get defensive, accusing me of not believing in her or not understanding how hard things were for her. Our relationship deteriorated further 3 years ago when Kimberly asked me to co-sign on a car loan. Her credit was shot, and she needed a vehicle for a new job. I refused, offering instead to help her develop a budget and rebuild her credit the right way. She exploded, calling me selfish and claiming I thought I was better than her just because I had a fancy government job. We didn't speak for nearly 2 years after that. The reconciliation, if you could call it that, happened at Dad's 60th birthday party just 2 months ago. We were civil, even warm at moments, reminiscing about childhood memories and checking in on each other's lives. Kimberly seemed more mature. She mentioned a steady job at an insurance office and a new boyfriend named Darren who had his act together. Dad was so happy to see us getting along that I made extra effort, even exchanging phone numbers again and promising to stay in touch. We had texted occasionally since then, mostly about Dad's recent health concerns, high blood pressure, and some concerning test results that had us both worried. Little did I know that during that birthday party, while I was helping Dad set up the backyard for guests, Kimberly had apparently spent time in his home office where he kept important family documents. I would later realize this was likely when she gathered the information she needed: my social security number, date of birth, and even copies of my signature from old family documents. In my professional life at the FBC, I had built a reputation for thoroughness and attention to detail. I'd worked dozens of identity theft cases, helping to prosecute people who drained victims' accounts, opened fraudulent lines of credit, and destroyed financial lives. I'd counseled victims through the painstaking process of reclaiming their identities and rebuilding their credit. Never once did I imagine I'd become a victim myself, and certainly not at the hands of my own sister. The morning it all unraveled started like any other Tuesday. I arrived at the office by 7:30 a.m., coffee in hand, prepared to present a major fraud case to my department. We'd spent months tracking a ring of identity thieves who had stolen over $2 million from elderly victims. The case was complex, involving multiple states and financial institutions, and I was lead investigator. The irony of what was about to unfold still haunts me. At 9:15 a.m., as I was walking my colleagues through the evidence we'd gathered, my phone began vibrating incessantly in my pocket. Initially, I ignored it, assuming it was a persistent telemarketer. By the third call, I worried it might be about Dad's health, so I excused myself during a colleague's section of the presentation. In the hallway, I checked my phone to find 6 credit monitoring alerts, 3 missed calls from my bank, and an urgent action required email from my credit card company. My heart rate accelerated as I scrolled through the notifications. The most alarming was from my credit monitoring service. Alert: new loan approved in your name, $100,000 with First National Bank. I immediately called my bank's fraud department, fingers trembling as I navigated the automated system. When I finally reached a representative named Trevor, he confirmed my worst fears. Someone had applied for a personal loan in my name just 8 days earlier. The application had been submitted online, followed by an in-person verification at a branch in Lawrenceville, about 10 minutes from Kimberly's apartment. The loan was approved 2 days ago, Trevor explained, and the funds were deposited yesterday morning into a newly opened checking account. I asked for details about the application, using my federal investigator credentials to expedite the process. Trevor emailed me copies of the documents while we were still on the call. Opening them in the empty conference room where I'd retreated, I felt physically ill. The handwriting on the application was clearly disguised, but had telltale signs of Kimberly's distinctive way of forming certain letters. The swooping tail on her Y's, the sharp angles of her M's. I'd recognize it anywhere from years of birthday cards and notes. The email address used was a slight variation of my actual email, hannahmitchell.pgh@gmail.com instead of my real hannahmitchell.pitt@gmail.com, subtle enough to pass a cursory verification check. The secondary contact information listed my sister's cell phone number and her apartment address in Lawrenceville. The loan application stated the money was for home renovations and debt consolidation, with monthly payments of $1,158 over 10 years. My hands were shaking as I hung up with Trevor and immediately called the credit bureaus to place a freeze on my credit. Between calls, I logged into my credit monitoring service and discovered something even more disturbing. There had been 3 hard inquiries on my credit in the past month from different financial institutions. This wasn't an impulsive act, it was calculated and planned. I canceled the remainder of my meetings and drove to the bank branch where the loan had been finalized. The branch manager, Alicia Torres, was apologetic and cooperative when I identified myself as both the fraud victim and a federal banking investigator. She pulled the security footage from the day the funds were dispersed. The timestamp showed 10:17 a.m. the previous day. There was Kimberly, dressed professionally in a blazer I actually recognized as one I'd given her years ago, confidently approaching the teller. The footage had no audio, but it was clear she was chatting casually, even laughing at one point, as she completed the transaction to access my money. My identity. Back at my office, I discovered through internal systems that Kimberly had also filed a change of address form with the Postal Service 3 weeks earlier, redirecting my mail to a P.O. box. This explained why I hadn't received any physical notifications about the loan application. She had thought of everything. As I dug deeper, leveraging the resources available to me as a federal investigator, I uncovered the full timeline of the fraud. 2 months ago, Kimberly attended Dad's birthday party, likely gathering my personal information from his home office. 5 weeks ago, she opened the P.O. box and filed the mail forwarding request. 4 weeks ago, she created the fake email address and began applying for loans at several institutions. 3 weeks ago, after being denied by 2 banks, she applied at First National, where the loan was eventually approved. 10 days ago, she completed the phone verification process, somehow passing the security questions. 8 days ago, she submitted the final application online. 2 days ago, the loan was approved. Yesterday, she withdrew the funds in person. Today, my world imploded. I sat at my desk, surrounded by the evidence of my sister's betrayal, feeling a cold, professional calm replacing my initial shock. This wasn't just a family matter anymore. It was a federal crime I was uniquely qualified to investigate. After compiling the initial evidence, I sat in my car in the parking garage for nearly 20 minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to process what had just happened. Personal betrayal collided violently with professional duty, creating a storm of conflicting emotions. As an investigator, I knew exactly what steps to take. As a sister, I felt paralyzed. My training eventually took over. I called my supervisor, Rachel Chen, requesting an emergency meeting. 30 minutes later, I was sitting in her office, my voice steadier than I expected as I explained the situation. I need to recuse myself from active cases temporarily, I told her, sliding a folder across her desk containing copies of the evidence I'd gathered so far. I've become the victim of identity theft. It's my sister. Rachel's expression shifted from concern to disbelief as she reviewed the documents. Hannah, I'm so sorry. This is complicated. Have you initiated a formal complaint yet? No, I admitted. I wanted to follow proper protocol given my position. I need guidance on how to proceed without creating conflicts of interest or compromising any potential case. Rachel nodded, understanding the professional and personal minefield I was navigating. I'll assign Marcus to assist you. He has experience with cases involving family members. In the meantime, document everything as if it were any other case. Meticulous, detailed, and by the book. Marcus Washington had been my colleague and friend for 5 years. We'd worked several major cases together, and I trusted his judgment. He arrived at my office an hour later, professional but compassionate. First things first, he said, pulling out a notebook. We need to separate Hannah the victim from Hannah the investigator. Tell me what happened, and I'll help you navigate both paths. For the next 2 hours, we outlined the proper steps for my unique situation. Marcus helped me file the official reports with the credit bureaus, the Federal Trade Commission, and local law enforcement. We documented every piece of evidence I'd gathered, creating a timeline that would stand up to scrutiny if the case went to court. When it went to court, I corrected myself mentally. Have you told your father? Marcus asked as we finished the paperwork. I shook my head. Dad's blood pressure has been unstable lately. His doctor warned about stress triggers. This would devastate him. And your mother? I laughed humorlessly. She'd probably help Kimberly flee the country. That evening, I called Dad with a vague excuse about why I wouldn't make our weekly dinner that Friday. Hearing his voice, so proud when he asked about my current cases, so oblivious to what was happening, made my chest physically hurt. For the first time since discovering the fraud, I broke down in tears after hanging up. I spent that night at my dining room table, surrounded by banking regulations and identity theft statutes I knew by heart but was now reviewing through a new lens. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Kimberly in that security footage, smiling as she stole my identity. Professional experience told me I should confront Kimberly immediately, but investigator instinct suggested gathering more evidence first. I needed to understand the full extent of the fraud before confrontation. Was this an isolated incident or part of a pattern? Was she working alone? What had happened to the money? The banker in me calculated the damage. A $100,000 loan would take years to repay, destroying my credit score and potentially affecting my security clearance at work. The sister in me wondered what desperate situation had pushed Kimberly to such betrayal. The investigator in me knew that personal feelings couldn't factor into what happened next. By morning, I had developed a clear action plan. I would continue gathering evidence legally, document everything meticulously, and prepare for an eventual confrontation. I would not tip my hand until I had the complete picture. After all, this was now more than a family matter. It was a case, and I was uniquely qualified to build it properly. I showered and dressed for work on autopilot, my mind still processing. As I grabbed my keys to leave, I noticed something that hadn't registered the day before. My spare house key, usually kept in a drawer near the door, was slightly out of place. Had Kimberly been in my home too? The thought sent a new wave of violation through me. This wasn't just financial betrayal, it was an invasion of every aspect of my life. At work, Marcus had already begun gathering information through official channels. We met in a secure conference room where he'd set up a case board, just like we would for any other investigation. "Your sister has been busy," he said grimly. "The loan is just the beginning." With Marcus's help, I began tracing the money trail through legal channels available to us as federal investigators. What we uncovered in the next 48 hours left me reeling. The $100,000 loan was just the tip of the iceberg. Bank records showed that within hours of receiving the funds, Kimberly had transferred $30,000 to a dealership for a down payment on a new Audi Q5. Another $5,000 went to a high-end department store for what the transaction details listed as wardrobe refresh. She had paid off 3 maxed-out credit cards totaling $22,450 and cleared a $3,700 medical bill from an emergency room visit 2 months prior. She was drowning financially, Marcus observed as we mapped out the transactions on our case board. "Look at these previous statements I pulled. 3 months behind on rent, utilities with disconnection notices, payday loans with astronomical interest rates." I stared at the financial wreckage of my sister's life spread before me. This doesn't explain or justify what she did, but at least it wasn't just frivolous spending. "There's more," Marcus said, pulling up another document. "I found evidence she tried using your information for 2 other loan applications before this one succeeded. Both were rejected due to inconsistencies in application information." "She was testing the waters," I murmured, "learning from her mistakes before going for the big one." Using my investigator access to financial databases, I discovered Kimberly had bounced 12 checks in the past year and had a pending eviction notice from her apartment complex. Her legitimate credit score was an abysmal 520, making it impossible for her to secure any conventional loans. As we dug deeper, another disturbing pattern emerged. Small withdrawals, $50 here, $75 there, had been trickling out of my retirement account for months. The authentication logs showed access from an IP address matching Kimberly's apartment building. She had somehow obtained my password or security answers. "Check this out," Marcus said, turning his computer screen toward me. He had pulled up Kimberly's social media accounts. There, displayed proudly on her Instagram, was a post from just 3 days ago, a photo of her posing beside the new Audi with the caption, "Financial Windfall. Fresh start in 2025. Number blessed. Number new beginnings. Number debt-free." The casual flaunting of her crime made my blood boil. In another post, she was tagged at an expensive restaurant with a man identified as Darren Wilson, the boyfriend she'd mentioned at Dad's birthday party. A quick background check on Darren revealed something alarming. He had 2 prior convictions for fraud, one specifically for identity theft, and had served 14 months in a minimum security prison. The pieces were falling into place. Was this his idea? Had he coached her through the process? That evening, I returned home to find subtle signs that someone had been in my apartment. Cushions not quite how I'd left them. A drawer slightly ajar. Trusting my instincts, I installed security cameras that night, hiding them carefully throughout my living space. The next day brought the most shocking discovery yet. Marcus had been checking if any other family members might be at risk. "Hannah," he said, his voice grave as he entered my office. "I found another loan application using your father's information. It was submitted last week but flagged for additional verification due to his age and credit history. It hasn't been approved yet, but they used all his correct information. Social security number, birth date, everything." My hands curled into fists. She was going after Dad too? With his heart condition? "It gets worse," Marcus continued. "The contact email for verification? It routes to Darren Wilson. The betrayal had expanded beyond me to target our father, the one person who had always supported both of us unconditionally. This wasn't just financial desperation anymore. It was calculated predation. That night, my security cameras captured footage of Kimberly using a key to enter my apartment while I was working late. She went directly to my home office, searching through files and attempting to access my computer. When the password failed, she made a frustrated phone call, speaking in hushed tones. Though the audio wasn't clear enough to catch every word, I distinctly heard, "It's not working. She must have changed it. No, I can't just ask her. We need to find another way." The final piece of evidence came from Marcus the following day. Emails recovered from Kimberly's account, showing conversations with Darren dating back over a year, discussing how to leverage Hannah's perfect credit and access the old man's retirement funds. They had been planning this for months, waiting for the right opportunity. One email from Darren to Kimberly, dated just after Dad's birthday party, read, "Good job getting the info from your dad's office. With her credit score and income, we should be able to secure at least $100 Kelvins. Maybe more if we play it right. Just remember the plan. Small test runs first, then the big one." I sat at my desk, staring at these messages that revealed the cold calculation behind my sister's betrayal. This wasn't an impulsive act born of desperation. It was a long con, a deliberate scheme targeting her own family, targeting me. The investigator and me had built an airtight case. Now it was time for the sister and me to confront the architect of this betrayal. You know, it's strange how we can miss the warning signs even when they're right in front of us. Have you ever looked back on a situation and wondered how you didn't see what was happening? If you've ever experienced a betrayal from someone close to you, drop a comment about how you handled it. I'm about to share how I confronted my sister, and trust me, what happened next changed everything about our relationship forever. Over the next 3 days, I meticulously prepared for the confrontation with my sister. This wasn't just about recovering the money or protecting my credit score anymore. It was about stopping a pattern of behavior that had now targeted our father and could potentially harm others. I consulted with Sarah Rodriguez, a prosecutor friend who specialized in financial crimes, meeting her for coffee away from the office to maintain discretion. "You've built a solid case, Hannah," she said after reviewing my evidence file. "More than enough for an arrest warrant. The question is, what do you want to happen next?" That question haunted me. What did I want? Professional justice demanded prosecution. Kimberly had committed multiple federal crimes. But family loyalty kept whispering about alternatives. Repayment plans, therapy, second chances. "What about Dad?" I asked Sarah. "His doctors say another major stress event could trigger serious cardiac issues. A public prosecution of Kimberly would devastate him." Sarah's expression softened. "Family complications are the hardest part of these cases. But consider this. If Kimberly faces no consequences, what's stopping her from targeting your father again? Or someone else's father? Sometimes the kindest long-term action isn't the easiest short-term one." Her words resonated with me. I'd seen too many victims of financial crimes whose perpetrators had started with small offenses that escalated when there were no meaningful consequences. The recidivism rate for financial fraud without significant intervention was alarmingly high. Back at my apartment, I created a detailed documentation package. Bank statements showing the fraudulent transactions, credit bureau reports, the mail forwarding documentation, security footage from both the bank and my apartment, and transcripts of Kimberly's emails with Darren. I made 3 copies, one for my records, one for potential legal proceedings, and one to present to Kimberly. I recorded a conversation with Trevor from the loan department confirming the details of the fraud, making sure to follow all legal requirements for recording in our state. Marcus helped me set up recording equipment in my apartment. Pennsylvania is a 2-party consent state, but I would inform Kimberly she was being recorded at the start of our conversation. The plan took shape. I would invite Kimberly over on the pretense of discussing Dad's upcoming heart tests. The conversation would be recorded, with Marcus in my guest bedroom as a witness and for safety. I would present the evidence methodically, give her an opportunity to explain, and then outline her options. Those options were limited. She could cooperate fully by returning what money remained, signing a formal confession, agreeing to a repayment plan for the spent funds, and accepting whatever legal consequences resulted. Or she could deny everything and face the full prosecution process without any leniency recommendations from me. The night before the confrontation, I barely slept. Memories of our childhood kept surfacing, Kimberly at age 8, crying after falling off her bike, me bandaging her knee and promising it would be okay, the 2 of us building snow forts in the backyard, staying up late whispering secrets and dreams. How had we gone from that to this? My phone chimed at 2:17 a.m. with a fraud alert notification. I sat bolt upright in bed, heart racing. Checking the alert, I discovered Kimberly had attempted to apply for another credit card in my name just hours ago. The application had been flagged because of the credit freeze I'd placed. The timing couldn't have been worse, or better, depending on how you looked at it. This latest attempt removed any lingering doubts about my course of action. She wasn't stopping. If anything, she was accelerating her efforts. Morning came, and I prepared my apartment for the confrontation. The recording equipment was hidden but functional. The evidence packages were arranged neatly on the dining table. Marcus arrived early, checking the setup and positioning himself in the guest room where he could hear everything but remain out of sight. "Are you sure you want to do this alone?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "I could sit with you, make it a formal interview." I shook my head. "She needs to see me, not federal investigator Mitchell. This needs to be sister to sister, at least at first." At 2 p.m., exactly on schedule, my doorbell rang. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and opened the door to face my sister. Kimberly stood there smiling, holding a bag from our favorite bakery. "Hey sis," she said cheerfully. "I brought those cinnamon rolls you love. Thought we could use something sweet while talking about Dad's stuff." Looking at her, acting so normal, so sisterly, I almost faltered. Then I remembered the security footage of her sneaking into my apartment, the email planning to target our father, and the latest credit application attempt from the middle of the night. "Come in, Kimberly," I said evenly. "We have a lot to talk about, and it's not about Dad." Kimberly walked into my apartment with the casual confidence of someone without a care in the world. She placed the bakery bag on the kitchen counter and shrugged off her jacket, the same blazer I'd seen her wearing in the bank security footage. "Your place is always so neat," she commented, glancing around. "I don't know how you keep it so perfect with your crazy work schedule." I stood by the dining table, my hand resting on the evidence folders. "Before we talk, I need to inform you that this conversation is being recorded for both our protection." She paused, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. "Recorded? Why would we need to record a conversation about Dad's medical stuff?" "This isn't about Dad," I repeated, gesturing to the chair across from mine. "Please, sit down." Something in my tone must have registered because her casual demeanor slipped slightly. She sat, her eyes darting to the folders beneath my hand. "Kimberly, I know what you've done," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. I know about the loan, the credit card applications, the mail forwarding, the attempts to access my retirement account, and your plans to target Dad next." Her face went through a rapid series of expressions: surprise, confusion, then indignation. "What are you talking about? Is this some kind of joke?" I opened the first folder and slid it toward her. "This is the loan application for $100,000 submitted in my name. Notice the contact information. Your phone number, your address." She glanced at the document, then pushed it away. "I don't know anything about this. Someone must have stolen my information too. And this?" I placed bank security footage stills showing her at the teller window. "This is you, withdrawing the funds from the fraudulent account, wearing the blazer I gave you for your birthday 3 years ago." Color drained from her face, but she rallied quickly. "You don't understand. I was going to pay it back. It's not like I stole from you. It's just a loan. A loan requires consent, Kimberly. This was identity theft, mail fraud, and bank fraud, all federal crimes." "You're overreacting," she snapped, her voice rising. "It's not like I'm some criminal. I'm your sister. I was desperate, and I knew you wouldn't help me if I asked. You've always been so judgmental about money." I maintained my composure despite the anger bubbling beneath the surface. "I need you to understand the severity of what you've done. I'm not just your sister. I'm a federal banking investigator who specializes in exactly this type of crime." That landed like a physical blow. Her eyes widened as the implications sank in. "You wouldn't turn me in. We're family." "Family doesn't steal from family," I countered, sliding over the next piece of evidence. Printouts of her emails, with Darren discussing their plans. "Family doesn't conspire for months to commit fraud against their sister. Family doesn't target their father who has a heart condition." She scanned the emails, her breathing becoming erratic. "How did you get these? You had no right to access my emails." "I had every legal right as part of a federal fraud investigation. Just like I had the right to access the bank records showing how you spent the money, and the camera footage from my own apartment showing you breaking in 2 nights ago." Tears welled in her eyes. "You don't understand. Darren said it would be easy money that you'd never even notice with your perfect credit and big government salary. We were drowning in debt. My landlord was threatening eviction. I had medical bills. And the Audi, the shopping sprees. Were those necessary expenses too?" She looked away. "Darren said we deserved something nice for once." "Darren has 2 prior convictions for fraud," I informed her. "Did you know that? Did you know he served time for identity theft before he met you?" Kimberly's face registered genuine shock. "That's not possible. He told me he was in Colorado for a year taking care of his sick mother." I slid over the printout of Darren's criminal record. "He was in Lewisburg Federal Correctional Institution. He's using you, Kimberly. And you let him use you to target your own family." She stared at the document, her facade crumbling. "I didn't. I never meant." Tears began streaming down her face. "Hannah, you have to believe me. It started small, just checking your credit score, using the information from Dad's files. But then Darren kept pushing for more. He said with your government connections, you'd be able to make it all go away if you ever found out. And Dad? Were you going to tell yourself that stealing from him was justified too?" She looked genuinely ashamed for the first time. "That was Darren's idea. I told him it was going too far, but he said Dad would never even know. He has enough savings that $50,000 wouldn't make a difference, but it would clear the rest of our debts." I leaned forward. "Here's what's going to happen now. You're going to tell me exactly how much of the money is left and where it is. You're going to sign a full confession. You're going to cooperate with returning every penny possible, including selling that Audi. And you're going to accept the legal consequences of your actions." Her expression hardened suddenly. "Or what? You'd really send your own sister to prison? What would Dad think about that? Dad raised us to be honest and responsible. I think he'd be more devastated by your betrayal than by the consequences you face for it." "You've always been the perfect daughter," she spat, anger replacing tears. "Always doing everything right. Always judging me for not measuring up. You have no idea what it's like living in your shadow." Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. Kimberly jumped, startled by the interruption. "Expecting someone?" she asked suspiciously. I wasn't, and the timing couldn't have been worse. "Stay here," I instructed, moving to the door. When I opened it, I found myself face to face with Darren Wilson. He was taller than his mugshot suggested, with an artificial charm that didn't reach his eyes. "You must be the famous Hannah," he said with a practiced smile. "Kimberly talks about you all the time. Hope I'm not interrupting sister time." Before I could respond, Kimberly appeared behind me. "Darren, what are you doing here? You weren't answering your phone, babe. Thought I'd swing by to pick you up." His eyes darted past us, scanning my apartment until they landed on the evidence folders spread across the dining table. His expression shifted instantly. "What's going on here?" "She knows everything," Kimberly said, her voice small. "About the loan, the emails, your criminal record." Darren's charm vanished, replaced by cold calculation. He pushed past me into the apartment, moving with surprising speed for his size. "We need to talk about this like adults. I'm sure we can come to some arrangement that keeps things private." The implied threat in his tone activated my training. I positioned myself between him and Kimberly, one hand discreetly pressing the emergency alert on my phone that would signal Marcus. "There's no arrangement to be made," I stated firmly. "The evidence has been documented and secured. Multiple people are aware of this investigation." Darren's face darkened. "Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? I've handled people like you before, think they're so smart with their badges and procedures." He took a step toward me, and I instinctively shifted into a defensive stance, grateful for the mandatory self-defense training the Bureau required. "Don't threaten my sister," Kimberly said suddenly, moving to stand beside me. "This is all falling apart because of us, not her." Darren looked at her with disgust. "Because of you, you mean? I told you to get the loan documents from her place, but you couldn't even do that right." "Step back and sit down, Mr. Wilson," I said with authority. "You're currently implicated in multiple federal crimes. Making threats will only add to those charges." Instead, he lunged forward, reaching for the evidence folders. I blocked his path, but he grabbed my arm, twisting it painfully. Kimberly screamed as we struggled, knocking over a lamp in the process. The guest bedroom door burst open as Marcus emerged, weapon drawn. "Federal agent, on the ground, now!" Darren froze momentarily, then bolted for the door. He made it to the hallway before colliding with two local police officers Marcus had called when I triggered the alert. They tackled him to the ground as he shouted obscenities and threats. In the chaos, Kimberly had collapsed onto my couch, sobbing uncontrollably. "I'm sorry, Hannah. I'm so sorry. I never thought it would go this far. I didn't know who he really was." As the police cuffed Darren and read him his rights, I sat beside my sister, emotionally exhausted. "It's too late for just sorry, Kim. You made choices, multiple choices, over months. That brought us here. I'll do anything to make it right," she pleaded. "I'll sign whatever you want, tell the police everything. Please don't let them take me away, too." "That's not how this works," I said quietly. "Actions have consequences. The best you can do now is cooperate fully and take responsibility." As Marcus approached with local detectives to take Kimberly's official statement, she grabbed my hand. "Will you tell Dad, or can we protect him from this?" It was the first unselfish thing she'd said all day. "I don't know yet, but he deserves the truth, even if we have to be careful how we tell him." The officers led a still sobbing Kimberly away as she repeatedly looked back at me, her eyes begging for a miracle I couldn't provide. The sister in me was heartbroken, but the investigator knew this was the only path forward, both for justice and, ultimately, for Kimberly's own redemption. Number. Part 8. The Aftermath and Legal Process. The hours following Kimberly and Darren's arrests passed in a blur of statements, paperwork, and procedural requirements. My dual role as victim and federal investigator complicated the process, requiring additional oversight to ensure everything was handled by the book. By midnight, I found myself alone in my apartment, surrounded by the physical aftermath of the confrontation: a broken lamp, scattered documents, and the untouched bag of cinnamon rolls still sitting on my counter like a cruel reminder of the facade that had crumbled. The next morning, I was summoned to meet with U.S. Attorney Patricia Winters, who had taken personal interest in the case due to my position with the Commission. Her office was immaculate, with framed law degrees and awards lining the walls, a testament to her 20 years prosecuting financial crimes. "Agent Mitchell," she began, reviewing the case file. "First, let me say how sorry I am that you've experienced this betrayal. It's doubly difficult given your professional role." I nodded, maintaining my composure. "Thank you. I'm trying to separate my personal feelings from the legal aspects. That's precisely why I wanted to meet. This case presents unique challenges. Your sister has already provided a full confession, implicating Wilson as the mastermind, while acknowledging her willing participation. And Darren?" I asked, refusing to cooperate. Claims Kimberly approached him with the scheme, not vice versa. Given his prior convictions, he's facing significant time regardless. Patricia leaned forward, her expression softening slightly. "Here's where it gets complicated. The U.S. Attorney's Office will pursue this case with or without your cooperation as the victim. The evidence is overwhelming. However, your participation would strengthen the case considerably, especially regarding impact statements and testimony." The implications were clear. I would need to testify against my own sister in federal court. The thought made my stomach turn, but I understood the necessity. "I'll do whatever is required to ensure justice is served." "There's another complication," Patricia continued. "Your sister called your father from detention last night." My heart sank. What did she tell him? According to the recorded call, she gave him a sanitized version, claiming it was all a misunderstanding about a loan she took out with your permission that got blown out of proportion because of your job. Anger flared within me. Even now, Kimberly was manipulating the truth. Within an hour of that conversation, my phone began buzzing with messages and missed calls from my father. I wasn't ready to speak with him, not until I'd processed my own thoughts and could present the facts calmly. When I finally called him back that evening, his voice was strained with confusion and concern. "Hannah, what's going on? Kimberly says there's been some terrible mistake. She says you're using your government position against her over a miscommunication." Hearing him repeat her lies made my chest tighten. "Dad, that's not what happened. I need to come see you in person to explain everything. It's complicated and it's going to be difficult to hear." The meeting with my father the next day was one of the hardest conversations of my life. Sitting in his living room, I methodically walked him through the evidence, showing him just enough to understand the severity without overwhelming him with details that might trigger his heart condition. His face crumpled as the truth sank in. "But why would she do this? To you? To me? Where did we go wrong with her?" "This isn't your fault, Dad," I assured him, though his questions echoed my own internal dialogue. "Kimberly made her choices. But she's your sister. She's my daughter. There must be something we can do besides sending her to prison." The plea in his eyes nearly broke me. The legal process has to run its course. The best thing for Kimberly now is to take responsibility and make amends. I'm not vindictively pursuing this. These are federal crimes with real consequences. He was quiet for a long moment before asking, "Have you told your mother?" I shook my head. Mom and I had barely spoken in years. "Not yet." "I'll do it," he sighed. "She should hear it from me." As predicted, my mother called me the next day, her voice shrill with accusation. "How could you do this to your sister, to this family? She made a mistake, and you're destroying her life over money." "It wasn't a mistake, Mom. It was calculated fraud committed over months. She stole my identity, took out a massive loan, and was planning to target Dad next. She says you're exaggerating everything to punish her for past resentments. If you just helped her financially when she needed it, none of this would have happened." The conversation devolved from there, ending with my mother declaring she would never forgive me for choosing my precious job over family loyalty. Her parting words, "You are no longer my daughter," echoed painfully despite our years of strained relations. Over the following weeks, the case proceeded through the legal system. A grand jury was convened where I testified about the discovery of the fraud and the evidence gathered. Marcus presented findings on Darren's prior convictions and the communication records showing the premeditated nature of the crimes. The grand jury indicted both Kimberly and Darren on multiple federal charges. Throughout this period, Kimberly attempted to contact me repeatedly. Calls from detention, letters, and messages relayed through her court-appointed attorney. The content swung wildly between seemingly genuine remorse and manipulative blame-shifting. One day, she would accept full responsibility. The next, she would claim I was persecuting her out of jealousy or spite. My colleagues at the FBC were supportive but curious, and I could sense the whispered conversations that stopped when I entered rooms. Despite assurances from Rachel that this wouldn't affect my career, I worried about the perception that I couldn't protect myself from the very crimes I investigated professionally. The strain began affecting my work performance. I found myself distracted during meetings, second-guessing my analyses, and struggling to maintain professional detachment when reviewing similar fraud cases. After a particularly difficult day where I nearly broke down during a department briefing, Rachel suggested I speak with Dr. Elizabeth Warren, the Bureau's staff psychologist. Initially resistant, I eventually scheduled an appointment. Dr. Warren specialized in supporting agents dealing with cases involving personal trauma or family complications. In her office, surrounded by calming blue walls and gentle lighting, I finally allowed myself to fully express the storm of emotions I'd been containing: betrayal, guilt, anger, grief, and profound loss. "What you're experiencing isn't unusual," Dr. Warren assured me. "You've suffered a compound trauma. The practical violation of identity theft combined with the emotional violation of familial betrayal. Either alone would be significant. Together, they're overwhelming. The worst part is that I'm supposed to be immune to this," I admitted. "I train people to prevent exactly what happened to me." "That's a common misconception," she replied. "Doctors still get sick. Security experts still get robbed. Your professional knowledge doesn't make you less human or less vulnerable to someone you trusted implicitly." Those sessions became a lifeline as the case progressed toward trial. Dr. Warren helped me develop strategies for maintaining boundaries with Kimberly and coping mechanisms for the family fallout. Most importantly, she helped me recognize that prosecuting my sister wasn't a betrayal of family loyalty, but rather an act of tough love and broader responsibility. "Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for someone is hold them accountable," she said during one particularly difficult session. "Without consequences, Kimberly will never have the opportunity to truly change." 3 months after the initial discovery, as trial preparations were underway, Kimberly's attorney approached the prosecution with a plea deal request. She would plead guilty to reduced charges in exchange for her full testimony against Darren and cooperation in recovering the remaining funds. The U.S. Attorney's Office consulted me before making a decision. While part of me wanted Kimberly to face the full weight of her actions, I recognized that a plea would spare all of us, especially our father, the ordeal of a public trial. More importantly, it would be the first step in Kimberly taking genuine responsibility. "I support the plea agreement," I told Patricia Winters, "provided it includes mandatory financial counseling, psychiatric evaluation, and a structured restitution plan." As Kimberly's plea agreement was being finalized, my mother arrived unannounced at my apartment one evening. She looked older than I remembered, the lines around her eyes deeper, her expression weary rather than combative. "I spoke with your father," she said without preamble. "He showed me the evidence you gathered. I didn't want to believe Kimberly could do something like this." It was as close to an apology as I would likely ever receive from her. I invited her in, and for the first time in years, we had a conversation that didn't devolve into accusations. As she left, she paused at the door. "You're doing the right thing, Hannah. I was wrong to suggest otherwise." The small reconciliation with my mother was unexpected, but I had learned through this ordeal that family relationships rarely followed predictable paths. As the legal process continued, I focused on rebuilding my credit, my sense of security, and my vision for what family could mean after such a profound breach of trust. Number. Part 9. The Resolution and Legal Consequences. 6 months after discovering Kimberly's betrayal, I sat in the federal courthouse, hands folded tightly in my lap as I waited for her sentencing hearing to begin. The courtroom was mostly empty. Financial crimes rarely drew spectators, but the front row held the key players in this family drama: my father, looking decades older than his 60 years, my mother, nervously twisting a tissue between her fingers, and me, the victim-turned-witness whose testimony had helped secure Kimberly's guilty plea. Darren's case had been severed from Kimberly's after he rejected all plea offers. His trial was scheduled for the following month, with Kimberly now a cooperating witness against him. His attorney had attempted to paint him as merely an accessory, claiming Kimberly had orchestrated everything and manipulated him due to his prior record, making him an easy scapegoat. The emails and text messages between them told a different story. The bailiff called the court to order as Judge Raymond Ortiz entered. Known for his strict sentencing in white-collar cases, Judge Ortiz had been presiding over financial crime cases for 15 years. He was fair but firm, with little patience for excuses or attempts to minimize responsibility. Kimberly was led in wearing a beige jumpsuit, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Without her usual makeup and styled hair, she looked younger, more vulnerable. Our eyes met briefly before she quickly looked away, her shoulders hunched forward as if trying to make herself smaller. Her attorney, Mark Goldstein, presented her case first, emphasizing her cooperation, clean prior record, and acceptance of responsibility. He submitted letters from her employer and a childhood teacher attesting to her character, carefully avoiding any mention of family letters. A telling absence. Miss Mitchell understands the gravity of her actions, Goldstein concluded. She has expressed profound remorse and has already begun making restitution by surrendering assets purchased with the fraudulent funds. She stands ready to accept the consequences while hoping for an opportunity to eventually rebuild her life and relationships. The prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney James Chen, then addressed the court, his tone measured but firm. The government acknowledges Miss Mitchell's cooperation. However, we cannot overlook the premeditated nature of these crimes, carried out over months against her own family members. This was not a momentary lapse in judgment, but a sustained campaign of deception and theft. When given the opportunity to speak, Kimberly rose shakily. "I want to apologize to the court for my actions," she began, voice barely above a whisper. "But more importantly, I need to apologize to my sister Hannah and my father." She turned slightly toward us. "What I did was inexcusable. I betrayed your trust in the worst possible way. I can't undo what I've done, but I am truly sorry, and I will spend however long it takes trying to make amends." Judge Ortiz listened impassively before addressing her directly. "Miss Mitchell, the court has considered your cooperation and lack of prior criminal history. However, I am particularly troubled by the familial nature of these crimes. Trust between family members is sacred in any functioning society. When that trust is violated for financial gain, it tears at the very fabric of our most fundamental relationships." He leaned forward, his expression stern. "Identity theft is not merely a financial crime, it is a violation of someone's personhood, taking their good name and reputation for your own benefit. That you did this to your own sister and attempted to do the same to your elderly father demonstrates a disturbing disregard for family bonds." Kimberly visibly flinched at his words, tears streaming down her face. "Therefore, it is the judgment of this court that you be committed to the custody of the Federal Bureau of Prisons for a term of 18 months, followed by 5 years of supervised release. You will make full restitution of the outstanding balance of $97,430, including interest and fees incurred by the victim. During your supervised release, you will undergo mandatory financial counseling and continue psychological treatment." The gavel struck with finality. 18 months. The sentence was within the range we had expected given her plea agreement. Yet, hearing it pronounced made it suddenly, painfully real. As Kimberly was led away, she looked back at us one last time. The expression on her face, a mixture of resignation, regret, and fear, would haunt me for months to come. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited, hungry for details about the unusual case of a federal fraud investigator victimized by her own sister. I declined all interviews, hurrying to my car with my father while my mother spoke briefly to Kimberly's attorney about visitation procedures. "Do you think the sentence was fair?" my father asked as we drove away from the courthouse. I considered the question carefully. Yes, it acknowledges the seriousness of what she did, while giving her a chance to rebuild eventually. The restitution and counseling are as important as the incarceration. He nodded slowly. I'm going to visit her every week. Your mother, too. Will you ever visit her? I don't know, Dad, I answered honestly. I'm not there yet. A month later, Darren's trial commenced. Despite Kimberly's testimony against him, despite the mountain of evidence showing his orchestration of the scheme, his attorney attempted to paint him as a victim of circumstance, a man with a troubled past who had fallen under the influence of a manipulative woman desperate for money. The strategy backfired spectacularly. The jury, clearly unconvinced by this portrayal, deliberated for just 4 hours before returning with guilty verdicts on all counts. Judge Ortiz, citing Darren's prior convictions and apparent lack of remorse, sentenced him to 7 years in federal prison. As predicted, the case attracted media attention due to my position at the FBC. Several news outlets ran stories with variations of the headline, "Federal Fraud Investigators Identity Stolen by Own Sister." While most reporting was factual, a few sensationalized pieces implied familial dysfunction or suggested I had used my position to pursue an unusually harsh sentence against my sister. The publicity created unexpected professional opportunities. Rachel asked me to develop a training module for the department about personal security measures for financial investigators. I was invited to speak at several conferences about the intersection of family dynamics and financial crimes. What began as a personal trauma was slowly transforming into a platform for education and prevention. Privately, I worked with the bank to repair my credit and financial standing. The process was tedious but familiar. I had guided countless victims through these same steps. The loan was discharged due to the fraud determination, but restoring my credit score and ensuring all affected accounts were properly flagged took months of persistent effort. Throughout this period, I continued seeing Dr. Warren, working through the complex emotions that surfaced at unexpected moments. Sometimes it was rage that bubbled up while performing routine tasks. Other times, crushing sadness while passing places Kimberly and I had frequented as children. The hardest were the moments of guilt, questioning if I could have prevented this by being more attentive to her struggles, by offering help before she felt desperate enough to betray me. Guilt is natural, Dr. Warren assured me during one particularly difficult session. But remember, you didn't cause her actions. Plenty of people face financial hardship without committing fraud against family members. 6 months after Kimberly began serving her sentence, my father suffered a minor heart attack. While recovering in the hospital, he made a request I couldn't refuse. Please visit your sister. Not for her sake, but for mine. I need to know there's hope for my family to heal someday. 2 weeks later, I found myself signing in at the Federal Correctional Institution where Kimberly was serving her time. The visiting room was stark but clean, filled with other families maintaining connections despite circumstances. When Kimberly was let in, she stopped short upon seeing me, disbelief written across her face. "Hannah?" she said uncertainly, as if suspecting a mirage. "You actually came." "Dad asked me to," I replied, not quite ready to pretend this was a voluntary reconciliation. "He's doing better, by the way. Back home now." She nodded, sitting carefully across from me. "They told me about his heart attack. I was so worried. Thank you for coming, even if it was for him." The conversation that followed was stilted at first, both of us navigating unfamiliar territory. We avoided discussing the case directly, focusing instead on her daily life in the facility, her participation in financial literacy classes, and her therapy sessions. Gradually, the rigid formality began to soften, not into the easy intimacy we'd once shared as children, but into something cautiously respectful. As our time drew to a close, she finally addressed the elephant in the room. "I know sorry isn't enough, Hannah. It will never be enough. But I want you to know I think about what I did to you every single day. The therapist here has helped me understand my patterns, the justifications I made, the blame I shifted. I'm not making excuses, just trying to make sure I never do anything like this again, to anyone." I studied her face, searching for signs of the manipulation I'd grown wary of. Instead, I saw something new, or perhaps very old, reminiscent of the earnest little sister I'd known before our paths diverged. "I believe you want to change," I said carefully. "That's a starting point. As I left the facility, I felt a subtle shift. Not forgiveness exactly, but a loosening of the knot of anger I'd carried for months. The path forward remained uncertain, but for the first time, I could envision a future where my sister and I might rebuild some version of a relationship, however different from what we'd once had. The experience of being both victim and investigator had changed me professionally as well. I began advocating for more comprehensive support systems for victims of familial financial crimes, recognizing the unique trauma they faced. The FBC implemented several of my recommendations, creating specialized resources for cases involving family members. By the 1-year anniversary of discovering Kimberly's fraud, my credit had been fully restored, Darren's appeals had been denied, and my father's health had stabilized. The practical aftermath was largely resolved, leaving only the emotional landscape to navigate a longer, less linear process with no clear completion date. What remained was learning to trust again. Not just Kimberly, if that ever became possible, but my own judgment. The sister I thought I knew had been capable of profound betrayal. The family dynamics I thought I understood had revealed unexpected fault lines. The professional expertise I had relied upon had failed to protect me from becoming a victim myself. Yet in that vulnerability came a new kind of strength, a deeper empathy for the victims I served, a more nuanced understanding of family complexities, and a hard-won wisdom about the boundaries between accountability and compassion. The case was closed, but its impact would continue to reshape my personal and professional identity for years to come. Part 10. 1 year later. Reflection and moving forward. The federal prison visiting room hadn't changed in the year since my first reluctant visit. The same institutional furniture, the same fluorescent lighting, the same vending machines humming in the corner. What had changed was me, and in subtle ways, the woman sitting across the table. "You cut your hair," Kimberly observed, reaching up self-consciously to touch her own shoulder-length style. 3 months ago, I replied. Needed a change. This was my 6th visit, each one marginally less awkward than the last. Today marked exactly 1 year since Kimberly's sentencing, a milestone that seemed significant enough to acknowledge, though neither of us had mentioned it explicitly. "How's Dad doing with the new medication?" she asked, settling into what had become our familiar pattern. Family updates first, personal reflections later, careful avoidance of anything that might reignite old tensions. "Better. His blood pressure is finally stabilized. He's even talking about taking that fishing trip he's been postponing." She smiled genuinely. "That's great. Tell him I said he should definitely go. Life's too short to keep putting things off." The irony of this philosophy coming from someone in prison wasn't lost on either of us. Kimberly had developed an unexpected self-awareness during her incarceration, a capacity to acknowledge uncomfortable truths without deflection or excuse. After exhausting the safe topics of family news and prison programming, we reached the point where surface conversation fell away. "I've been thinking a lot about Mom lately," Kimberly said, her fingers tracing patterns on the visiting room table, "about how she raised us to see money as, I don't know, as both the solution to everything and never quite enough." I nodded. My sessions with Dr. Warren had explored similar territory. The constant comparison to other families, the "we deserve better" mantras. Exactly. Kimberly met my eyes directly. "It doesn't excuse what I did, nothing does. But I'm trying to understand the thinking that made it possible for me to justify it. Mom always acted like financial rules were for other people, not for us." This level of introspection was new. Early in her sentence, Kimberly had still occasionally slipped into blame shifting. It was Darren's influence, the unfairness of her financial situation, the ease of the crime. The counseling sessions required by her plea agreement seemed to be having an effect. "My therapist here has been helping me recognize these patterns," she continued. "How I would feel entitled to things I hadn't earned. How I'd get resentful watching you succeed through hard work while I wanted shortcuts." I wasn't perfect either, I acknowledged, surprising myself with the admission. I could be judgmental, self-righteous about financial responsibility. I didn't always see how much you were struggling, but that didn't give me the right to steal your identity. Her voice was firm. Nothing would have. The clarity in her statement felt like a milestone, perhaps the most significant one of this anniversary. For the first time, I fully believed she understood the gravity of what she had done. "I have some news," she said, changing the subject. "I've been accepted into the prison's accounting certification program. It's basic, but it's a start. I thought maybe with a legitimate financial skill." She trailed off, looking uncertain. "That's great, Kim. Really. And I've been writing everything down. All the justifications I used, the warning signs I ignored, how Darren manipulated me, and how I let myself be manipulated. My counselor thinks it might help other women avoid similar situations." As our visiting time neared its end, Kimberly asked the question she posed at each visit. "Have you thought any more about what happens when I get out next year?" In the early months, I had deflected this question, unable to envision any relationship beyond these structured prison visits. Today, I had a different answer. I found a halfway house with a good success rate for financial offenders. It's in Pittsburgh, not far from Dad. They have a job placement program with companies willing to hire people with fraud convictions. I slid a printout across the table. "I've already spoken with the director. They'll hold a spot for your release date." Tears welled in her eyes. "You did this for me?" "I did it for both of us. For the whole family." It was true. Helping Kimberly establish a stable, legitimate life post-release wasn't just charity. It was protection for all of us, including her. Back at my apartment that evening, I updated the document I'd been maintaining throughout this ordeal. A detailed journal of the financial and emotional recovery process. What had started as evidence documentation had evolved into a therapeutic tool and, eventually, the foundation for a professional project. The case had transformed my career in unexpected ways. 3 months after Kimberly's sentencing, I was promoted to lead a new division at the FBC focused on family financial fraud, cases where the perpetrators and victims shared DNA as well as financial histories. We developed specialized training for investigators and created educational resources for the public about preventing, recognizing, and addressing familial financial exploitation. My father had fully embraced his role as Kimberly's staunchest supporter, visiting weekly and sending care packages filled with books on financial responsibility and personal growth. The heart attack had been a wake-up call, prompting him to finally retire and focus on his health. Our weekly dinners had resumed, though they often included difficult conversations about family dynamics that had previously gone unaddressed. My relationship with my mother remained complicated. After her initial support during the trial, she had retreated into familiar patterns, minimizing Kimberly's responsibility, suggesting I should have handled it privately, occasionally implying that my career success somehow contributed to Kimberly's actions. We maintained limited contact, primarily coordinating visits to Kimberly and care for my father. The most profound changes were internal. The professional identity I had built around being a financial crimes expert had been shaken by becoming a victim myself. Initially, this felt like failure. How could I protect others when I couldn't protect myself? Over time, with Dr. Warren's guidance, this perspective shifted. My personal experience had deepened my understanding of victimization in ways no training could provide. The case studies I presented now were infused with authentic insight into the psychological impact of financial betrayal by family members. My heightened vigilance about personal financial security initially manifested as paranoia, changing passwords daily, checking accounts hourly, installing excessive security measures in my home. Gradually, these behaviors moderated into reasonable precautions. I would never again be cavalier about financial documentation or sharing access credentials, but I had moved beyond the hypervigilance that had consumed me in the months after the discovery. The hardest lesson had been about forgiveness, not as a single moment of absolution, but as a complicated, non-linear process. There were still days when anger flared unexpectedly, when trust seemed impossible, when the violation felt as fresh as the day I discovered it. Dr. Warren had helped me understand that these feelings didn't negate progress. They were natural fluctuations in the long process of healing. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or eliminating consequences, she had explained. It means freeing yourself from the consuming power of resentment while maintaining appropriate boundaries. Those boundaries remained important. While I was helping facilitate Kimberly's transition back into society, I had no illusions about immediate restoration of trust. Our relationship would require careful rebuilding, with verification systems in place that would have seemed cold before but now represented necessary protection for both of us. Me from potential reoffending, her from the temptation of opportunity. The most unexpected outcome of this ordeal was finding my voice as an advocate and educator. Last month, I had been invited to speak at the National Conference on Financial Crimes, not about technical investigation techniques, but about the human impact of identity theft within families. Standing at the podium, sharing my story with hundreds of investigators, prosecutors, and victim advocates, I had come full circle from victim to survivor to leader. Financial crime between family members creates a unique form of trauma, I told the audience. It's not just the monetary loss or credit damage, it's the fundamental questioning of your reality. The people you believed you knew become strangers. The safety you felt in your family identity becomes suspect. Recovery requires rebuilding not just financial security, but your entire understanding of trust and relationship. The response had been overwhelming. Other investigators sharing similar personal experiences they had never discussed professionally. Victim advocates requesting training materials. Even financial institutions reaching out about implementing enhanced protections for vulnerable family members. As I completed my journal entry for the anniversary, I reflected on the question that had haunted me throughout this journey. Was justice served? Kimberly was serving her sentence and showing genuine signs of rehabilitation. Darren remained in prison, his appeals exhausted. My financial standing had been restored. By objective measures, the system had worked. Yet justice felt like an incomplete concept for the complex reality of family fraud. No legal outcome could fully heal the broken trust or restore our family to what it had been before. Perhaps the truest justice was in the transformation that had occurred. In Kimberly's growing accountability, in my evolving capacity for boundary-setting compassion, in our father's willingness to finally acknowledge family dysfunction, in the hundreds of potential victims who might be protected through our educational outreach. The fraud had permanently altered our family landscape, but from that altered terrain, something new and potentially stronger was emerging. A family built on honesty rather than appearance, on accountability rather than avoidance, on reality rather than wishful thinking. Tomorrow, I would return to work on a new case. Another family, another betrayal, another opportunity to apply both professional expertise and personal understanding. Tonight, I closed my journal knowing that while this particular chapter of our family story had reached its resolution, the lessons it contained would continue to inform every page that followed. You know, going through something like this changes you forever. If my story has resonated with you in any way, whether you've experienced betrayal from someone close to you, or you're just trying to better protect your financial identity, I'd truly love to hear your thoughts in the Placed Wars comments below. Have you ever had to rebuild trust after it was broken? What helped you move forward? If this story gave you any valuable insights, please hit that like button and consider subscribing for more real-life experiences that might help someone else going through similar challenges. Sharing these videos can also reach people who might need to hear they're not alone in navigating complex family situations. Thank you for being part of this journey with me. Life doesn't always give us clean, perfect endings, but sometimes the messy, complicated ones lead to the most growth. Stay safe, protect your financial information, and remember that while family bonds are precious, healthy boundaries are essential too.